The wind that night carried more than just the cold. It carried a sound deep, distant, and ancient, echoing across the frozen hills of Wyoming. Frank Miller paused halfway through his patrol. The cemetery was quiet as a painting white with snow, the headstones glimmering faintly under a dying lamp. And then it came again. A howl. Long, mournful, too steady to be the wind. It rose from the forest beyond the iron gate, the kind of sound that makes your chest tighten and your instincts flare. Frank had heard wolves before, back when he was a ranger up north, long before life brought him here to this small cemetery in the foothills of the Bighorns. But wolves didn't come this far south anymore. Not for years. He set down his lantern, listening. The howl came again, closer this time, followed by silence so heavy it pressed against his ears. He whispered to himself, "You've got to be kidding me." For the next 3 nights, it happened again. Always around midnight. Always from the same direction. Frank couldn't shake the feeling that the wolf wasn't just passing through. It was visiting. Pause, softer tone. Have you ever heard a sound that made you feel both afraid and alive? Tonight, I'll tell you a story about a man who guarded the dead and a wolf that refused to forget the living. What happened next would leave everyone in town speechless. Frank Miller had spent most of his life chasing silence, and yet he never found it. Even here among the dead, the world kept whispering. He was 62, a man carved from the same wood as the cabins that dotted the foothills. Former park ranger, once stationed at Yellowstone, where he spent years tracking elk herds, logging wolf activity, and teaching tourists how to read bear scat. He used to laugh about it. "I knew more about wolves than about people," he'd say. But one winter night, a storm took everything. A rescue mission gone wrong. A partner lost in whiteout snow. Frank never spoke of it again. After retiring, he took the caretaker's job at the small cemetery hill outside a forgotten Wyoming town, a place so quiet that even the wind moved carefully. He didn't believe in ghosts, but he believed in memories. And the cemetery was full of them. Most days followed a rhythm: sunrise coffee, brush the snow off graves, fix the squeaky gate, feed the stray ravens that nested in the elm tree near the fence. When the work was done, he'd sit on the porch of the caretaker's shed, drinking from a metal thermos, looking out at the endless white. Sometimes he'd talk aloud to the trees, to the mountain, maybe to himself. But lately, it felt like something was listening back. He began noticing things: faint tracks near the perimeter, too big for a coyote, too deep for a dog. The tracks circled the graveyard, then vanished into the forest beyond the fence. Always the same direction north, always returning the next night. Locals had stories, old ones. They said wolves used to roam freely here before the cattle wars. Then the ranchers came, and the bullets followed. Now only ghosts of the pack remained. Frank never told anyone what he heard those nights, not even Sheriff Burns, who stopped by on Sundays for coffee. What would he say? That the dead have visitors, that a wolf was guarding the graveyard? He knew how it sounded. And yet each night when the howling began, something stirred deep inside him, not fear, but a strange comfort. It reminded him of Yellowstone, of campfires, and field logs of watching wolves through binoculars as dawn touched the peaks. Perhaps he thought it wasn't death that haunted this place. Maybe it was loyalty. Frank Miller had spent most of his life chasing silence, and yet he never found it. Even here among the dead, the world kept whispering. He was 62, a man carved from the same wood as the cabins that dotted the foothills. Former park ranger, once stationed at Yellowstone, where he spent years tracking elk herds, logging wolf activity, and teaching tourists how to read bear scat. He used to laugh about it. "I knew more about wolves than about people," he'd say. But one winter night, a storm took everything. A rescue mission gone wrong. A partner lost in whiteout snow. Frank never spoke of it again. After retiring, he took the caretaker's job at the small cemetery hill, outside a forgotten Wyoming town, a place so quiet that even the wind moved carefully. He didn't believe in ghosts, but he believed in memories. And the cemetery was full of them. Most days followed a rhythm: sunrise coffee, brush the snow off graves, fix the squeaky gate, feed the stray ravens that nested in the elm tree near the fence. When the work was done, he'd sit on the porch of the caretaker's shed, drinking from a metal thermos, looking out at the endless white. Sometimes he'd talk aloud to the trees, to the mountain, maybe to himself. But lately, it felt like something was listening back. He began noticing things: faint tracks near the perimeter, too big for a coyote, too deep for a dog. The tracks circled the graveyard, then vanished into the forest beyond the fence. Always the same direction north, always returning the next night. Locals had stories, old ones. They said wolves used to roam freely here before the cattle wars. Then the ranchers came and the bullets followed. Now only ghosts of the pack remained. Frank never told anyone what he heard those nights, not even Sheriff Burns, who stopped by on Sundays for coffee. What would he say? That the dead have visitors, that a wolf was guarding the graveyard. He knew how it sounded. And yet, each night when the howling began, something stirred deep inside him, not fear, but a strange comfort. It reminded him of Yellowstone, of campfires and field logs, of watching wolves through binoculars as dawn touched the peaks. Perhaps he thought it wasn't death that haunted this place. Maybe it was loyalty. The first time Frank saw it, he thought his mind was playing tricks. Snow had been falling all evening, thick and slow, muffling every sound. By midnight, the cemetery looked like a blank page. Frank stepped out with his lantern, checking the fence line like he always did after a storm. The light swayed, catching glints of frost on the iron gate. And then, movement. A shape gliding between the gravestones. Large, silent. His breath caught. He raised the lantern higher, its glow trembling on the snow. There, it was a gray wolf, standing no more than 30 feet away. The animal was tall, lean, its fur heavy with snow, eyes reflecting gold under the light. It didn't bare its teeth. It didn't run. It simply stood there, looking past him, at something else. Frank turned, following its gaze. The wolf was staring at a grave, one he knew well. The name carved in the stone read, Dr. Henry Lowell, 1953 to 2021, naturalist, author, defender of the wild. Frank remembered Lowell. The man had lived on the edge of town writing books about wolves, arguing they weren't monsters, but teachers, guardians of balance. Most folks laughed at him. After he died, nobody ever came to visit his grave. Until now. The wolf lowered its head just slightly, a slow, deliberate bow. Frank felt something stir in his chest. He whispered, "You knew him, didn't you?" The wolf blinked once, as if acknowledging the question. Then, with a grace that didn't belong to this world, it turned and vanished into the falling snow. No growl, no sound. Only the prints it left behind, leading straight back into the forest. Frank stood there for a long time, the lantern flickering in his hand, realizing what he'd just witnessed. A wild wolf visiting a man's grave. And not just any man, one who had dedicated his life to protecting its kind. The next morning, Frank checked the spot again. The snow was fresh, the prints gone. But something had changed in him. Fear had given way to wonder. For the first time in years, Frank felt less alone. Maybe the wolf wasn't haunting the dead after all. Maybe it was honoring the living who had never forgotten them. From that night on, the wolf returned. Always around the same hour, just past midnight. Always to the same grave. Frank stopped pretending it wasn't happening. He started leaving small offerings at the edge of the forest, a few scraps of meat, sometimes a rabbit he found frozen in the snow. He never saw the wolf take it, But every morning, the food was gone. The snow disturbed only by a trail of careful paw prints. It wasn't hunger that fascinated Frank. It was the ritual. The wolf never came close to the cabin, never crossed the fence line. It stayed where it belonged, on the threshold between the living and the dead. Frank began talking to it softly while he worked. "Evening, friend," he'd say, while brushing snow off the gravestones. "I hope you're staying warm out there." He didn't expect an answer, but sometimes when the wind shifted just right, the wolf's howl would rise in reply. Neighbors started asking questions, still hearing that Wolf Sheriff Burns teased one morning, sipping from his thermos. Frank shrugged. Haven't seen him in a while. He didn't tell them the truth that the wolf was the only company he wanted. Days grew colder, the kind of cold that cracked wood and silenced birds. Frank noticed the wolf's prints less often. He worried, though he wouldn't admit it. One night, the storm rolled in early. Wind slammed against the shutters. Snow fell in thick sheets, swallowing the world outside. Frank stoked the fire, poured coffee, and told himself he'd stay in. But when the howling started again, weak, broken, and closer than ever, he couldn't ignore it. Lantern in hand, he stepped into the storm. The snow blinded him, stinging his face like sand. He followed the sound past the fence, past the first row of graves, until the beam of his light found it. The wolf collapsed beside Henry, Lowell's gravesides, heaving fur soaked and frozen. Frank's first instinct was to kneel beside it, but he stopped himself. Old training kicked in: never corner a wild animal, especially one in pain. He crouched several feet away, speaking softly over the wind. "It's all right, boy. You're safe here." The wolf lifted its head, weakly, eyes half open. For a moment, they locked eyes. Then it lowered its head again, exhaling a faint puff of steam into the snow. Frank backed away slowly, letting it have space. He returned to his cabin, fetched an old wool blanket, and laid it near the gate along with some meat. By dawn, the storm had passed, and so had the wolf. Only paw prints remained circling the grave once before disappearing into the woods. Frank found the blanket untouched, but the food gone. He smiled faintly. "You stubborn thing," he murmured. That was the moment he understood it wasn't pity that drove the wolf here. It was loyalty. The forecast called it a fast mover, the kind of winter front that drops out of the mountains like a hammer. By late afternoon, the sky had gone from pewter to black, and the wind off the bighorns carried the taste of iron. Frank finished his rounds early, checking the hinges on the iron gate, making sure the lanterns were tight and the chains secure. He paused at Dr. Henry Lowell's grave, brushing a crust of old snow from the stone. "Storm tonight," he murmured. "If you've got company coming, keep him under your wing." He meant it as a joke, but the words stuck in the air like frost. By dusk, the first squalls came loose and playful. Then, as night fell, the storm found its voice. Snow turned heavy and wet, plastering the windows, roaring in the pines. The caretaker's radio crackled with road closures and power alerts. Frank set another log in the stove, poured coffee, and listened to the house tighten in the cold. It would have been easy to wait it out. But storms did strange things to memory, and to wolves. Just after 11, he heard it, a sound thin enough to be imagined, real enough to raise the hair on his arms, a howl broken by wind. Not distant, near. Frank took the lantern and stepped outside into a wall of white. The world had been erased. Snow surged through the gate like surf lapping at the first row of stones. The beam of his light cut a narrow tunnel through the night. Flakes appeared and vanished like sparks. "Easy now," he said to the storm, to himself. Easy now. He followed the path he knew by muscle memory, counting steps between markers. The Iron Angel, the leaning oak, the low ridge of veteran stones. Then his light struck movement, not wind, not branch, a body in the snow. The wolf lay curled at the base of Henry Lowell's stone, its flanks rising shallowly fur, matted with ice. For a second, Frank's ranger brain flashed warnings: distance, posture, line of retreat, but the animal didn't stir. Its eyes were slits of amber behind a veil of snow. Frank crouched several feet away, breath burning his lungs. "Hey," he said, the word nearly stolen by wind. "It's me." The tail gave the faintest tremor. The wolf turned its head as if to acknowledge, then set its muzzle back on its paws. Lightning, the winter kind that rips, silently turned the world white. The delayed boom rolled across the cemetery like a train. "Can't do this here," Frank said. He took off his coat, then stopped. No sudden moves, no cornering. He slid the coat across the snow, letting it come to rest within reach of the wolf, a line of warmth offered, but not forced. From his pocket, he set down a folded wool scarf, then a chunk of meat wrapped in paper. The wolf didn't eat. It only watched every rise of its ribs a small battle. The iron gate banged open somewhere behind him, the chain torn free by wind. Frank flinched, then set his lantern in the lee of the stone. "Storm's bad," he said, voice low and steady, hoping tone could be a blanket. "But it'll pass. They always pass." Another flash, another roll of thunder. The wolf gathered itself as if to stand, failed, tried again. Frank's whole body clenched against the impulse to reach out. Once years ago in Yellowstone, he'd watched a pack hold vigil for a wounded female. They'd kept their distance, making a circle in the snow, their eyes never leaving the center. Respect, he'd thought then. It means stepping back, not stepping in. He eased an arm through his coat sleeve, tugged it half over his shoulders, and shifted to give the wolf space. "Stay if you need to," he whispered. "I'll keep watch." He did not move for a long time. Wind screamed in the fence pickets. The lantern flame ran under its glass like a trapped bird. Snow layered on the wolf's back and slid away in sheets as if the storm could not decide whether to bury or spare. Frank felt his legs numbing, then the slow ache of returning blood. He counted breaths. He told the storm stories to pass the minutes of elk calves, learning to run on new legs of early mornings, with coffee and a notebook of a man named Henry Lowell, who argued that loyalty existed in more species than ours. When the next lull came, the wolf lifted its head and pulled itself forward 2 short, stubborn motions until its shoulder touched the base of Henry's stone. It pressed its cheek against the cold granite and exhaled a sound not quite a whine, not quite a sigh. Something inside Frank shifted. He had seen grief in people. Now he recognized it in the wild. "Okay," he said, voice catching. "Okay." He reached to steady the lantern as wind surged again. Sleet blasted sideways. The light guttered and steadied. The wolf's breathing slowed each draw, a deliberate act. Its eyes found Frank's. Thunder rolled. Then, rising out of its chest like a memory, the wolf let out a single thin howl, a note so spare it seemed woven from the storm itself. The sound cut clean through the noise, hung for a heartbeat above the stones, and fell into silence. Frank bowed his head. He didn't reach for the animal. He didn't speak. He simply kept the watch he had promised, marking time by the pulse in his ears and the blow of the weather. Minutes later, or hours, the wind eased. The snowfall softened to a whisper. When Frank finally looked up, the wolf's eyes were closed. Its body was utterly still. He stayed where he was and counted 30 steady beats of his heart before moving. Respect. Always respect. He rose slowly, joints protesting, and began the work that belonged to caretakers making a place. Choosing a line, smoothing snow. He did not dig. The ground was iron. He did not move the body, not yet. He opened the shed, fetched a simple wooden cross, a canvas shroud, a length of twine. He wrote no name. Only a small mark, loyalty. He set the cross not in earth, but in snow beside Henry's stone, a promise to return when the thaw allowed proper ground. He worked without hurry, without spectacle. When the storm finally broke apart and the moon showed through, he stood back and let the silence settle. At dawn, the sheriff's bronco clawed up the hill tires, searching for purchase on ice. Sheriff Burns took in the scene. Across the drifted snow, the coat stiff as a plank, and lifted his hat. "You call this in?" he asked. "Not yet," Frank said. "Figured I'd do it right." Burns glanced toward the tree line. "Damn storm. Could have dropped him here." Frank didn't correct him. He didn't say came. He said dropped a small difference that separates accident from intention. "Regulations?" Frank asked. "Game and fish will want relocation or removal," Burns said, eyeing the cross. "You know the drill." They walked the perimeter in the weak light. No new footprints, no sign of a pack. Just the tidy scrawl of one set of paws in circle out and the storm's attempt to erase the rest. Burns left with a promise to radio the state office. Frank stayed. He boiled water on the stove, thawed his hands, and waited for the road crews to clear the county route. Mid-morning, he returned to the grave to tidy what the storm had shredded. The cross was there, the scarf, the lantern glass filmed with ice. But the wolf was gone. Frank froze, breath fogging the air. The shroud lay crumpled where the wind had tossed it. In its place, a clean oval in snow, and a path of prints leading not to the gate, not to the forest, but around the cemetery, a slow, deliberate circuit before they vanished in glare toward the north slope where the wind scoured the hill bare. He followed as far as he could. The prints ended at the fence corner where the drifts thinned to crust, then nothing. A raven called once from the elm, a sound like a hinge. Frank stood with a hand on the cold fence post and let the new fact settle against the old ones. Storm, vigil, stillness, disappearance. He felt no triumph and no fear, only the strange, sober relief of a story refusing to be simple. By noon, 2 officers from Game and Fish arrived, faces raw from wind. They photographed the tracks, took notes, looked skeptical. "Could have been a dog," one said. Frank lifted an eyebrow. "Big dog," the other admitted. "What do you want us to do about the—" He gestured toward the cross. "Leave it," Frank said. "Till thaw. It's for a friend." The officers traded a look they saved for retirees and poets, then shrugged. "Fine by us." When they left, the hill went quiet again. Clouds tore open. Sunlight pooled in the low places, turning the ice to glass. Frank walked back to Henry's stone, set his palm against the granite, and stood there until his hand stung. He did not speak. Some words were too small for mornings like this. That evening, with the power still out and the radio clicking uselessly in the corner, Frank lit the lantern and opened the cabin door. The storm had scoured the cemetery clean. No tracks, no loose branches. The cross still stood thin and stubborn, casting a pencil shadow on the snow. He made tea and sat on the step, the cup warming his hands. Night gathered without hurry. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a coyote yipped, then went silent as if embarrassed to be heard. Frank lifted his gaze to the tree line and listened to the kind of quiet that holds its breath. When the sound came, it did not surprise him. A single note, far and thin the way music sounds when you remember it rather than hear it. A howl not of hunger or challenge, but of acknowledgement. A line thrown back across the day, tying one moment to another. Frank closed his eyes. "Safe travels," he said. "I'll keep the gate." He did not know if the wolf would return. He did not know if he had witnessed a farewell or a passage. He only knew that storms arrive and storms pass, and that between the two, There is a kind of fidelity to place, to memory, to the watchers who stand their shift, whether anyone sees them or not. When the lantern burned low, he rose and latched the door, the habit of a man who respects both the living and the dead. On the table sat the scarf he'd meant to leave by the stone. He folded it neatly and set it beside the thermos, a